not in a bad way, not in a bad light, but shouldn't it be taken for granted, or is it too simplistic to say once you qualify, just get the job done, as opposed to once you qualify and you're a woman, just get the job done?
So an interesting perspective, and I think you're among 3 women, so I tread carefully with some of those comments. But no, I joke. I think women and men have peculiarities. I think where we need a bit more advocacy and understanding is the fact that women's lives, unfortunately, require a lot more. There are many more nexuses. So the average woman typically is a caregiver for her parents or elderly relatives, okay? Now, that is whether or not she's married. Now, if she's married, she then is a support system and partner to her husband. And the majority of the household work falls on her. If she has children, that's multiplied. Now, when you factor all of that in, and then you come into a society that already has implicit bias against women, then you find that the barrier is that much higher. And so you can't then, as you said, just assume that things should work. You then have to peel back the layers to identify what exactly are those barriers. What are those things holding women back from achieving their full potential? And I always say, a woman can choose to be in a kitchen, it's fine. She can choose to be in a boardroom, it's fine. What is important is it should be her choice. She should be allowed to achieve the fullest potential of her capacity without there being somebody else putting a barrier that is hindering her from going there. And that's what the work that most of the women groups do, is to ensure that those barriers are removed or reduced substantially.
Isn't it about time, Mrs. Gabi-Williams, that we reviewed that perspective? Because, I don't know, there are those who believe that the world has gotten to where it is now because it's the men that have led. So isn't it about time we consider differently and take samples or data of where countries or nations or communities where women led and things were different? Or is it, you think it's not just about the gender, it's about the person?
I think gender does play a role in it. I mean, historically, we've been confined, fairly around the world, confined to domestic spaces. We're the caregivers, we're the nurturers. I think we've actually done very well in Nigeria. And I come from the Yoruba tribe, and we're particularly empowered. But I think maybe one of the problems is that we're leaving it to other people to gather data for us. I was reading some advice given by a publishing consultant to emerging publishers who are trying to proactively seek promotions within their organizations. He said, you have to keep a running list of all the contributions you have made to the growth of your company, so that when you're seeking promotion, you can build a solid business case. And I think that principle applies, that we have to take charge of gathering the kind of data about ourselves, tangible evidence that builds the case for our inclusion and representation at different levels of government, for instance, in the companies we work in. Yeah.
But do you, maybe I should even ask this question of both of you before we continue. It's International Women's Day. Yesterday was International Women's Day yesterday. It is Mothers Day?
Mothering Sunday tomorrow.
Okay. See the difference? Oh God, man, you have only one in a year. Anyway, so is it tokenism for you? Or you think it actually gets its prime of place or pride of place?
Can you rephrase the question so I
understand?
Is
it tokenism to just have International Women's Day and have a theme to it? Or you think it actually does get its pride of place, its significance?
I think it is significant because it achieves various things. Number one, we have a day where we can celebrate women's achievements. We have a day where we can get together and establish how far we still need to go, how far we come, and how far we still need to go. It's our day given to us for these kinds of discussions. I think that's very, very important. And the entire world is mobilized around this day. Here we are in Nigeria. They're just as mobilized anywhere else in the world around this day. Yeah, I think, I think I don't think it's tokenism at all. I think it's very important.
No, but in 50, 80, 100 years from now, do you think there's still going to be anything like International Women's Day? Because right now, we're having more women heading states. So, I mean, my belief is that the numbers are going to increase as time goes on. So there'll be no specific spotlight. It will be like it's normal. If you have an election, it's either a man wins or a woman wins, because the women are going to be there, contesting in large numbers as much as the men are. So we're going to have more women heading states. You probably will go to a heads of states conference and there'll be probably 50 men and 40 women. So as the numbers increase, will there still be a need for an International Women's Day?
I think we mustn't forget that there are people, their demographics, who are hidden and their suffering is off stage. You're talking about these people, they're very visible. Political candidates, they're very much on stage, they're very visible. So we have to look at pockets of poverty that will continue to exist for probably a long time. We mustn't be utopian idealists. I think we should aspire to utopian ideals, but we must also be really grounded. There will be these huge swathes of poverty where a lot of inequities, injustices are being sustained against that kind of grain, against that movement forward. So yes, what International Women's Day will start to do is to look for those pockets, those unreached swathes of human population, and start talking in terms of their needs.
But do you
So I mean,
do you agree?
I agree with her, but I have a different view to whether it's tokenism and whether International Women's Day will still be necessary.
Okay.
So, taking us back a little bit to the history of International Women's Day, the movement started in 1908. I think that's more than 100 years ago. And it was because 15,000 women took to the streets in New York, marching for equal pay, better working conditions. And 116 years later, we are still talking about discriminatory practices, a regression and a rollback in civil liberties for women across the world, especially in Nigeria. When you look at the statistics in political representation, we have regressed. I believe we're currently just below 4% female representation in political office in a country where there's arguably more women than men when you look at the overall numbers. So I do think that International Women's Day is in danger of becoming a little bit of a token that's given to women to make us quite happy and jolly one day in the year. And then once the month of March rolls away, all the budget spend that was allocated to doing parties and, T-shirts and doing banners, just gets hidden away again. And then for 11 months, we go quiet until next year. And I think it's really critical, particularly for Nigeria, and given where we are on so many of the indexes where we are just ranked pretty much bottom of the class on every social developmental index across the world, that we have to ask ourselves why, what is the problem? And Nigeria has done well in the corporate space. So when you compare us to many other countries, we do have women as captains of industry. We do have women in some parts of Nigeria that have equal access to education, are allowed to continue education and then aspire and get jobs. However, look outside that space. When we look at even entrepreneurs, female entrepreneurs are still more likely to remain micro and not scale their business. When you look at women in all the different tiers of political representation, I don't believe we have a female governor yet. And even a female deputy governor seems to be out of our reach.
But we've had one.
No, we have. I'm talking about right now. So I think for me, and we really need to then decide for ourselves what direction we want the country to go in.
Perhaps one of the challenges here is engaging women themselves. Alero here has spent decades as a broadcaster. I've spent some decades as well as a broadcaster. One of the things that we have seen is that even though men do it, I mean, they try to pull each other down to get up there, it happens with women too, perhaps even more fiercely in some cases. So some would say that the number one enemies of women against this thing that you're saying is women themselves. So can we gather them in this month? All these women. That's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is these women are wives of men who want to get into office. So how do we have this conversation in a way that women will be able to say, husband, stay there, I'm supporting a woman?
So I think the first
Is
thing
it possible?
first thing is to thank channels, because you do this every March. And like I said, I think I've been here once or twice in the past. So the first thing is educating and getting the messaging out right. And when you have programs like this, hopefully there are many women watching and it's piquing their interest, and men watching as well. So I think education is key. In my experience, and we were hotly debating this before we came in here with the two ladies you had before us, I think that the narrative around women not supporting women is wrong. I think that women are not given as much grace to fail. I think there are a number of men that we can talk about that are vicious in the way that they compete and pull each other down. But the narrative is not that men are not supporting men. The fact that people are competitive is not gender specific. It's a product of the environment in which we work in, whether you're a man or a woman. However, as WIMBIZ, we do run a number of programs. We have mentorship programs for entrepreneurs as well as women trying to get on boards to help them to work better with each other and with men. We've got connect programs that bring women together where we network, we talk about these topical issues, we try to change perspectives and thought leadership. We also have empowerment programs, and we advocate by getting the message out that we're stronger together. But I do want to change the narrative because we hear it a lot. And in my personal and professional experience, that has not been the case. I have been equally supported by men and women. Okay. And I've also been equally pulled down by men and women. So I can't blame one gender.
Okay. Do you agree with her on that, women supporting women or not?
Yeah, I think that, we talk a lot about collaboration and solidarity. And you've got two levels here. We've got the conceptual level, which I think actually does work. We do collaborate, and we do, but at the sort of more sort of domestic level, in the interpersonal level, we do pull each other down. And that's sort of, this side of paradise, it probably won't change. We go to self-help, we do workshops to get beyond this kind of really futile, directionless competitiveness, really negative. But the conceptual level is still important, and the level of organizations like WIMBIZ, WISCA, Women in Successful Businesses, Careers, which I was very impressed. I was introduced to WISCA through an event they had in September 2022, I think, where it was in partnership with Chimamanda Adichie. And they invited female political candidates to outline their campaigns, their agendas moving forward, and encouraged us to sponsor, to support with money. And I thought that it was such a practical, effective way to do it. It was a lovely venue. They tabled their agendas very clearly. We had some short, lovely, really professional videos. And I really liked that interface between the sort of the private sector, the business world, and politics.
And the women still didn't make any impact.
Well, Ireti got through. Ireti King got through. That was nice meeting her, listening. But it was just a very proactive initiative. And so I think that kind of thing, that was quite exceptional. But I think that kind of thing does take place. Solidarity events, women supporting women. But I think what we really need to do, women, is address interpersonal. The interpersonal toxicity when your friend is moving forward. We have to have a frame of reference for being able to process success in our friends that doesn't detract from our own progress. We seem to think if you progress, that means there's less for me. We have to work on that way of looking at the world around us, looking at this thing called success. I think that we have to address those Yes.
I like that. Earlier, you talked about the rural area when you were answering Arlera's question about the future and all of that. Getting down to brass tacks, getting to the rural areas, to the rural communities. How does this kind of conversation you're talking about now, this kind of initiative, this consideration you're making, how do we pass that down there? Because I don't know if there is a WIMBIZ in a particular local government somewhere in other parts of Nigeria. So that's perhaps one of the things you're talking about when you're talking about this interpersonal toxicity. Probably some would say, even though they are communal in those communities, when it comes to interpersonal, this can be an issue. How do we cascade this kind of information there?
I think through the, religious institutions, churches and mosques, and I think that they're being underutilized. I also I'm a trustee of an Alzheimer's Foundation, and we started working, in these fora. Because that's where the people congregate, where the religious institutions, and regularly. So you can do it on different scales. They have their sort of cell groups, fellowship groups. So if you want to target smaller groups, which is also very effective, you can sit there and mentoring about life itself. Because I think that's what we have a wrong apprehension, a misapprehension about what life is about. And this idea of the shrinking asset, this national cake, this shrinking, we have to reverse that way of looking. And I think a lot of the problem, I keep on saying that it needs to be addressed at that level. And I think that religious institutions, not because you're going to preach to them, but because it's a forum where people gather. People gather. I think that, yes, that's how we can get all this information cascading down and traveling across all the borders in a nation. Yeah.
Okay, well now, so making progress now, I mean, we're talking about development and nation building here. What part of this, so I'm going to ask you maybe a little difficult question. It's a question that I've asked all morning. We talked about security. I was asking, one of the questions I was asking, what peculiarity will come into our security architecture in the country with women in charge or with more women in the space? For you as well, what would be different if we had more women in corporate governance, more women in elective posts? What difference will it make?
So, all the studies have shown, I think you asked a question earlier about this as well.
Yeah.
We were sort of asking for examples of where women had been in leadership and what the outcome has been. And the studies suggest that when you have women in leadership, we have less conflict, we have better emotional intelligence, we have sustainability of earnings, less short-termism, and they don't take as many risks. Now, that tells me that there's a place for women and men because you need to take risks to make money, But I think specifically when you look at having more women in leadership in Nigeria, politically, for me, it would mean less conflict. I think women are better able to have conversations without resorting to pulling a gun. And we see that all around the world. There's so many wars being started as we speak. And if you look at the leadership of those countries, what you would find is quite a lot of testosterone. So I do believe that there's a role that women play in calming and rationally having conversations. And I think that would help from a security perspective. I think when we then look at women in, economic leadership positions, I think you would see less short-termism, a better goal in creating long-term sustainable growth and development, which is where Nigeria needs to be heading. Now, I'm not saying that we don't need men, and I'm not saying that it's certainly not a gender war, but I think that there's a place for both. And at the moment, there are not enough women, and that's why we are seeing a lot of the issues we're seeing. So we'll see a better Nigeria, a more secure Nigeria, a more vibrant Nigeria, a more economically prosperous, and a more equitable society.
Anyway, when you talk about women being more temperate, the picture that came into my head straight away is a woman called Margaret Thatcher. But don't even talk about that one right now.
Can I say something to local thing? I think that the nurturing gaze of a woman embodies protectiveness, sustaining what there is. Men, hunters, go out and grab. I'm not saying we don't have aggression, I'm not saying that, but that's probably environmentally produced, is induced by the environment. I think that that gaze would actually reduce outbreaks of armed conflict, those kinds of skirmishes, because we have that way of looking, protecting, sustaining, keeping things intact,
which is natural,
safe, which is natural to us. So that, I think, that woman's gaze, I think that you have a very valid point there. If we had more of us at that level, we'd be less warmongerish. Yes, I definitely think so.
Now, what unique perspectives or approaches do women leaders bring to nation-building efforts?
So I'll take myself, for example, my professional capacity. And I work for sort of a financial technology company where we're forced to take quite interesting decisions. We're forced to juggle quite a number of things. And I find that working in tandem with the gentlemen that sit alongside me, there's almost a yin and a yang. And there's that perspective to say, wait, can we hold on a little bit? Is this the right course? What is the impact on stakeholders going to be? How do we get our staff to become more engaged? And it's just as valuable and as valid as pushing the products and ensuring that we are grabbing market share. But you can't do all of that without the staff, without the engagement, without stakeholder management, without thinking about the long-term impact of a decision. And I think when you have women in the position of political leadership, you get that perspective. You sit down to make laws and bills. There is no way that you can have a bill or a law that benefits the entire country if you only have one perspective. The same thing with innovation. Innovation requires ideas to solve problems. If you only have one perspective to a problem, there's no way that what you innovate is truly going to solve the problem, because you haven't brought that diversity of thought, of perspective, of ideas. And so it's about how do we pull, you can't fly a plane with only one engine. That's what we're doing. You're putting a plane in the sky and only one side is firing. The other side is at 10% or 2% because you're not engaging and involving them. And I think that's what is missing.
But then it means that significant communication is lost, isn't it?
Yes.
So at what point did we lose it, and how do we bring that back? Because there are those who talk about patriarchal society now. I'm saying, look, this is just some orientation in somebody's head, right? Can't it be reversed?
The scary thing for me is I don't think this is how it's always been. Mm-hmm. When I sort of read about Nigerian history and I look at, even in the rural areas, the way that they operate, specifically you look at the women's groups have always been very strong in keeping law and order.
Yes. Even
in solving issues. They've been very strong. So somewhere along the line, we've lost that link. And we've relegated women to domestic servitude. And I think that, as she said, making sure that we are talking about this in the various religious establishments, but also that we're educating children very young. So one thing we've also lost is civic education, is history. That needs to come back very urgently.
Okay. You wanted to add to that?
Yes, I do. I'm one of the founders of the UN SDG Book Club African chapter, and the gender equity list. I'm very proud of that, the reading list. We target children ages 6 to 12 years plus. And on that list, we have a lovely little book for the very youngest children, about 5, 6, called Father Snail, where Mummy has gone out and Daddy and they're sort of at home, completely at a loss. What do we do now? We're so dependent on Mummy. And so they become resourceful and they sort of work it out in their own sort of crazy way. And this is a way of reversing gender stereotyping and the lack of fluidity in roles. Men can cook, clean, do all those things as well. And I thought it was such a sweet, lovely story way of introducing this, reversal of gender, stereotypical gender roles to little children. So we target little children deliberately because everything starts with the child. You've got child development. It's a foundation of adult development, human development. So we make sure we curate the most sort of ingenious reading lists that really communicate these principles to children in a way that will stay with them and expand them, because this is where to do it. There's a book on that list also called Rude Awakening, which showcases the traditional Igbo inheritance rights. And she wrote it for young children and young adults, actually, because, it starts with them. If we can change their mind, they're going to grow up into adults who won't perpetrate such barbarism against their mothers and their sisters and their aunts. So yes, I don't know if I answered your question.
Yes, but I want to ask you your own question now about this very issue that you have raised. Our democracy is 24 years old. It's 25 this year, right? And the child born 1999 is 25 this year. So in another 25 years, we'll be celebrating 50 years of Nigeria's democracy, God willing. What should we do now to the newborn? How should we plan for that fellow, that young child? What developmental initiatives should we come up with at the family level, at the societal or community level, at the state level, at the national level, to ensure that that fellow, by the time he or she is 25, is actually a nation builder and not another nuisance to society?
I've just explained that we have fantastically well-curated reading lists. They need to read books that address these issues and read them in as engaging a format as possible. The reading culture needs to be addressed. We need to really promote the reading culture. That is the secret. That is how you learn high-quality books. Addressing all economic justice issues, social justice issues, environmental justice issues.
So we need to come up. We need to come up with as a nation or as a state. We need to come up with plans along that line.
Have book clubs in every library. The network of book clubs and reading promoters are working on that now with advocating to government. Have rehabilitate libraries, have book clubs in every libraries, introduce fun, illuminating activities in the classroom, addressing these issues, do a lot of role play, get the children out and about doing projects, get the children interfacing with local government chairman, for instance, get them visiting, supervise with the teacher, and get them going to talk to local government chairman about, say, single-use plastics, environmental degradation, all that kind of thing. I think that's through the existing structures of schools, through existing structures of rehabilitated libraries, and channel activities and awareness creation through those means.
Motherhood is quite a tricky one, right? And as you said earlier, the mother has to combine her career with motherhood, with wifing, or is it wifehood? But the children are very, very important.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, in fact, there is a Yoruba saying that a good child is the father's.
Of course.
The other one belongs to the mother.
Meanwhile, he hardly had a hand in the matter.
Okay, so what are the challenges young mothers? I in the course of the week, I don't know if you listened to that episode of Sunrise Daily. In the course of the week, we read a newspaper report. I think it's on the front page of the Guardian newspaper, that the span of widows in our nation, Nigeria, span between age 23 and 40s.
Yes.
That was shocking.
Yes.
And disturbing. So what are the things that young mothers need to pay attention to now in the light of this, International Women's Day, so that they can raise the kind of children they want to see in the future?
So I think, as she said, education is very important. That's the only way you can really open and broaden minds. So as mothers, it would be to, as they raise their kids, encourage the kids to have as diverse a reading habit as possible and perspectives. I think for the mothers themselves, children, they do what they see. So we have to be intentional in our own behavior. You can't behave in one way and say something else. There's an incongruence and the kids will be confused. So if you want to raise children that are going to be independent and able to achieve, whether boys or girls, and for boys as well that you're hoping be more open-minded and will embrace gender parity, it has to start from the home. They've got to see their mother and their father behaving as equal partners in the relationship, because you have to role model these things. And I think beyond that as well, mothers have to speak up. When you see something that isn't done right, one of the things that we often do is we look away. Let me not see. I did not see. But the kids are watching. So you've got to also be quite vocal in what you stand for and what you stand against. And I think the last thing for me is that it's such a tough world for mothers and fathers too, to be honest. Everything is tough. We have to go easy on each other. We have to support each other. And we need to take time to self-care. Because if you don't have anything in you, you can't pour out.
Yeah.
So you've got to take the time to recharge.
And Tom, in light of what just happened a few days ago in Kaduna, where those children were abducted, 287 of them, even though we hear that 50 of them have been brought back, you're both saying to us that education is very important. Now, those women who have lost, well, not lost in the sense of not to death, to abduction, who have lost their children, if they now decide they're never going to let the other children they have go to school, what would you be saying to them?
Well, this is the right to protection issues, the safety issues. But that's what we're talking about now. It's a safety issue. I would address that to them. I would address that don't get confused. They're two different things. What we have to do, I understand your fears. What we have to do is safeguard your children. And then, you get the local governments involved, and you get the resources you need to make sure that safeguarding is in place. And so you address it from that point of view and let them see that this is not a school issue, this is a safeguarding issue. The children need to go to school, because I also think that a lot of the things that happen are because needs are not being met, psychological needs are not being met, psychosocial needs. We talk about really sort of violent patriarchy. We talk about, machismo on steroids. And I think a lot of this kind of abductions are perpetrated by people with these kinds of pathologies. And don't quote me because I'm not, but that's for one. I think that is the word, So we have to address that. We have to address the specific needs that are not being met, which lead to this kind of behavior, So, and that brings me back to the point I really need to make when we're talking about International Women's Day, the Day of the Girl Child. We have to remember the boy child, and we have to remember the needs that they have that may be neglected. And there's a reason why they're always expressing themselves, well, not always, they express themselves so often in these very sort of hostile, aggressive ways. They're acting out, they're imposing. There's something they need that isn't being met. And there is a Day of the Boy Child. I can't remember the specific day, is it June or... I think that's something, if we're going to achieve gender parity, we mustn't leave out the boy child, because the boy child, he's the perpetrator of all our woes, according to so many of the conversations, exactly. So let's meet their needs, and we may discover that things start to fall into place.
Even though sometimes it's the woman that will say, but my boyfriend, he beat me. Like, go and fight that. Anyway, let's get into that one this morning.
Well, we are the ones who say that the boys don't do housework because they're boys, and the girls, you go and sweep and you go and cook, yes. And the boys out playing football. We're the ones who put the ideas in their heads. Yeah. So we must also call ourselves to order.
Agree with me. Ngover Ihyembe-Nwanko, ED Business NIBS and member Board of Trustees, WIMBIZ, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.
As well as Gabi-Williams. Where is the paper I used to introduce you the other time? Well, thank you so much for your time. Truly appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Next is the home stretch. Guess who the guest is? Another
Guess
woman.
who's coming to dinner?
You mean to the next segment? Another woman.
We'll be right back.
It's
We know